Haley and I were laughing. We were just in Ron's talk in the main hall, and we said we'd rather be in an empty small room than an empty large room. So I thank you guys for coming today. We really appreciate your interest in elite open water swimming. You know, open water is it has a very open meaning. Like we are talking oceans, we're talking rivers, lakes, ponds. We're talking currents, we're talking flat water, any sort of challenge, and actually any distance. I mean, I think that's one of the things that I was not aware of. The open water racing had been going on for long before I entered the world of open water, and that was in 2005. But you know, my first world championship, I learned there's a 5K, there's a 25K. You know, now there's a team relay, and you know, it's a crazy sport. The 10K in the Olympic Games is called the marathon swim. I'm not sure if that's the right name because I feel like it scares people off sometimes. But you know, in a 2-hour race, you are seeing lots of lead changes. You're seeing speed. You're seeing red cards, yellow cards. Sometimes you're diving off a dock. Really, it is just a wide open meaning, and I love the strategy. I always love the tactics, understanding who your competitors are, because I think that's another interesting part about open water that made it fun for me is like you're not racing the clock. You are looking eye to eye at your competitors, and you're like, you know, I've got to be the best today. Or in the matter of World Championship selection for the Olympic Games, you're like, I need to be top 10. And so it kind of adds a different strategy as far as coaching, and really it's so exciting. I feel like the highs are really high and the lows, you know, there's some pretty bad races as well. Haley will get to share some of those. But really it's just a great sport. It's fun to be part of. As Steve mentioned, like I had no idea what I was doing in 2005. I was an assistant coach, coaching a young kid. He was 15. And everyone said, oh, he shows promise in open water. You know, this is going to be fun. So we show up to Lake Placid and we trained there for a week. And we went on to Montreal. The staff was awesome. I was like, the sport is so fun. I learned a ton. You know, Chip ended up winning a gold medal in the 10K and a silver in the 5K. And I mean, that probably helped make it a little bit more fun for me. But coming back, I was like, ooh, let's do more of this. Fast forward about 3 years, and I came home that summer and I was offered a job at UNC. That's my alma mater. And you know, spent 3 years there. It was awesome. At 2008, Coach Saylor called me and said, hey, Southern California is calling your name. I knew that was going to be very different than North Carolina. And you know, in making that choice, I was like, okay, my open water career is probably over. I've had 3 great years, but that's okay. I'm ready to move on and coach, be really invested in the college team. But little did Haley know, or I know, that our paths were going to cross. And you know, 10 years later, we're still, you know, I've had the opportunity to work with her for 10 years, maybe longer. So. Yeah, I mean, basically open water has provided me so many opportunities, but it's the people and it's the stories. And I think you guys will share some of that today. Obviously talk about some of the things that we feel like made a difference in helping Haley be the best American athlete. And for those of you that don't know, I don't know that this slide totally does her justice, but I think it's pretty incredible what she's done as an athlete. You know, open water has this stigma that you can't do pool, you can't do open water, you got to really focus on one. And I think she's a great representative of somebody that her mindset, her willingness to learn, her ability to be coached by almost anyone and take what she could to apply to, well, let's see, she's in the 5K at World Championships, she's on the 25K. Team relay, the only American to ever win a medal in open water swimming, qualified for 3 Olympic Games, I'm just going to tell you guys, I was talking to Jason Lezak earlier, and he said it's really hard to sustain success in the sport of swimming. And if being on the national team for 11 years in the same event, if that's not sustained success, I don't know what is, because it's really hard to continue to qualify in the 10K. Sometimes nationals are in October. Sometimes nationals are in April. Like, we work together to figure out, like, okay, when do you need to be good? And Haley has a way of showing up when the lights are bright. And I'm going to let her talk a little bit now just about maybe some of the people in her background that really helped her develop this mindset, and then maybe share why you got into open water and why would you stay for 11 years?
So my background in swimming is it's a family sport for us. My mom stayed in college at the University of Hawaii, so she got my sisters and I into swimming pretty early on. But I had some great club coaches throughout my childhood, which led me to USC, and having some great coaches there, and always had great relationships with my coaches. Was able to communicate well with them throughout, even when I was younger, and just a great foundation from my parents. It was very unique in that my mom's made her coach roads growing up, so I don't know if you guys know how hard his practices are. They're very tough. So she made us take days off when we were younger, which was reverse psychology, so we wanted to go more. Did a little bit of open water in high school, but more just like practicing, just swimming around the lake that we grew up next to. Then when I went to USC, this coach was like, I think you have the right temperament for open water. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know if it was a compliment or whatever, but I was like, I'll take it, I'll try it. I did open water select camp after my freshman year in college, and then did that for a week, and then went off to nationals and swam my first 10K, my first race, qualified for World Championships in the 25K. So my second race was a 25K. I don't recommend that route, but she told me it wasn't going to be bad, and I trusted her. It wasn't terrible, but I was like, I don't know what I'm getting myself into. So, sometimes when you just blindly follow and trust, you just do it. I did what I was told, and I've tried it out. I didn't like it, but then I had an opportunity to go to like a World Cup race in like Mexico, and I was like, I'll go to Mexico, like, of course. So I stuck with it, and it grew on me, and I kept making teams, so I enjoyed that. But I did actually make World Championships in the pool before I made World Championships in open water. So I did have a good background in both.
I think it's incredible just to know that Haley was like a Pac-12 champion in the 500, NCAA champion in the mile, Olympic trials, finalist in the 400 IM. And Ron, I see you sitting there. Your athletes are swimming 200 back, 200 fly. We never got there, but that's for you. So really, Haley has been instrumental in my career. I feel like as a coach, there's not one way to help an athlete be successful. The biggest thing for me was understanding what athlete I'm working with and trying to help them reach their goals. I would say every year looked a little bit different as far as, what's the focus going to be this year? How are you going to balance your pool events? When are you going to go on training camps? Things like that. I think Haley really trusted in the process. So there's not, different athletes are going to qualify. Hopefully your athlete qualifies for a national team, because that's the part that's really fun. I think we've traveled to 6 continents.
Yeah. We were trying to count it out yesterday.
That's not cold water, not Antarctica.
No.
Okay. So yeah, we're pretty done, but 6 continents is pretty good. Races all over the world, and so here we are. I love this quote because I believe this is true in life, and then even more importantly in open water swimming. Even listening to Ron about 10 minutes ago talk about how they were going to host a race here in October. Oh, well, now there's a dust storm, or there's a new construction going on. There are so many things in open water swimming that you cannot control. So it's really hard to have a set plan and if there continue to be little like bumps along the way, for a coach, I can't let those get me too upset, and I have to model for the athletes that, you know, oh, we thought this was going to be a wetsuit race, and then maybe we get to, or you know, Doha, and like, no, never mind, the temperature is this, so we're not going to be wearing wetsuits. You know, that's just a small example of a lot of things can go wrong, and there's a lot of things that you can't control, especially in a 2-hour race. You know, like I said, you can't control when somebody else pushes you underwater. You can't control somebody taking your feed at the feeding station, because you know that stuff, it does happen. And the reality is that if for 2 hours you are letting every little thing get to you, then you think about all the energy that you're expending. So, you know, I think we just tried to have fun with the process and kind of laugh about, like, oh, 2016 in Rio, the technical meeting, so the day before the race, and they changed the course.
Yeah. I was going to say, even at the highest level, things can go wrong. Yeah, so the night before the race, the Olympics, it all of a sudden changed to, okay, you're no longer starting from a dock. Oh, the course changed as well. The waves sort of broke up the course. So even at the highest level, you have to deal with a lot of changes. It's not just like your local open water race that has to deal with those things. It's every level of open water, and I think that's why most open water athletes are some of the most resilient. And I think that comes from the coaches too. When you handle what is given to you from an athlete perspective and a coach perspective, I think it leads to success.
It's just how, you know, I have to remember, you know, I have to control my attitude, I have to control the delivery of the message, you know, whatever that is. And, you know, I want to think back, Haley, the first Olympic Games she qualified for, because every single one was just about different, but in 2011, World Championships were in Shanghai. She was not one of the athletes qualified to swim the 10K. So we had kind of written off the Olympic selection, like probably at least one American is going to qualify. They're probably going to be top 10. You know, she called me from Shanghai, and it's like, okay, nobody qualified. What does this mean now? So it's like, okay, now we have another shot. Let's figure out how can you be top 2 at nationals in April, and then how can you go on to Portugal 2 months later, and not only, you know, be top 5 there, but actually win the race. And that was really the only chance that she had to qualify for the games in 2012. And so I would say probably earlier on in our career, we were more probably coach-led, as far as probably telling you, you know, you should probably do this, or let's make sure we go to open water here. And I would say over the years, we evolved, and Haley was used to traveling to races, to World Cups, and you know, I wanted her to learn, Coach Taylor wanted her to learn how to be able to take care of herself, and to learn what she needs and how she's feeling. And so, you know, I think over the years that was probably one of the things that also led to.
Yeah, both Catherine and Dave created some really independent athletes, which led me to be able to go to different training camps with different teams, to go to different races. If they couldn't go because of college season, I was able to go with other people. So they led me to really be able to be an independent and self-sufficient swimmer, but I still relied on them. It wasn't like I know best, I didn't know best. I still listened to everything they told me. But it did lead to two really great relationships where, yes, at the beginning it started out with her telling me which races were going to be great, and then by the end it was like us coming together with a plan of where we're going, what we're doing, and the reasoning behind that.
Yeah. Can you think of any other races where maybe you showed up and things were not as planned? Like, I can think of one. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Oh, there is a World Cup race in Qatar. We showed up to the race thinking it was going to be at a certain time. We kind of had to sit there and wait it out and wait for them to tell us, like, okay, actually, we're going to push the race back 30 minutes. Oh, it might be an hour. Oh, it might be a wetsuit race. But wait. And I was like, okay, like, oh, it's going to be 8 loops. Oh, now it's 6 loops. So everything that could change did change. And we were just kind of waiting there like, okay, we're all in the same boat, and that's what you had to remember for open water. And any sport, really, it's everyone there with you, the 50 other competitors are all in the same boat of like, you don't know what's going to happen. Like, the second you dive in, that's when it's set. Like, and actually not even now. We've had races canceled in the middle. But yeah, you just have to take everything that's thrown at you and really respond in the most positive way you can.
So not always easy.
No.
Okay, I'm gonna hope that this link works. I might actually need to go. Sorry, I know I'm not. This is why I'm so coach.
We can play that.
That we've learned over the years. I believe that you can swim as fast as you want in a pool. You can swim, have the record for 100 100s as fast as you want. At the end of the day, if you cannot figure out how to, master the art of a turn, drafting, feeding is a really big one. Sights and turns, and then finishes. And I think, Ron, you also alluded to this, that like you can be fast in the pool, but you've got to be able to master these skills, because this is really different when you show up to a nationals with 15 people versus a world championships, which is 70. I know some open water, some triathlons start out with hundreds of people. So, for today, we're going to focus more on the 10K and sort of what are some of the strategies that we came up with and learned from each other over the years. So another big difference between pool and open water is the feeding station. And I think that's one of the questions as a new coach showing up to an open water national, like, what are you feeding? What's the feed? Really, we can make it as complicated as we want, but at the end of the day, there are feeding sticks that actually provide your athlete with nutrition, hydration along the race course. There are FINA rules and regulations on how long these can be, what the size of the flag can be on the feeding stick. Coaches are generally on what is called a feeding dock. Again, this is one of the fun things about open water is you'll show up to the race and I have been on a boat that is taking me out to a floating feeding dock. No bathrooms or anything like that. I've been on a boat that takes me to another boat that's anchored in the middle of the ocean. And then you're trying to lock down your feeding position on these floating pontoons. There's also times when we show up to Mexico or even our U.S. nationals where we're expected to feed in the water. So that's another exciting thing.
It's hard for you when you're like 5
foot. This is a big part of the conversation. I think as a pool coach, you go to a finals at Olympic trials, and you're like, you've got your notebook and your stopwatch. That's it. At open water race, you're like packing for war. You have like a feeding stick, you've got extra duct tape, you've got a cooler, extra, just anything extra, a backpack. So that's another fun part of this sport. The biggest piece of feeding that I take away from it after all these years is the communication that you have with your athlete. That's communication pre-race, that's communication in the middle of a race, and actually post-race, I believe is where you learn the most from your athlete. And so pre-race, some of the things, talk about, what are we talking about pre-race?
Before a race, we'll talk about our strategy of where she's going to be on the dock, when to expect me, when I'm going to feed, and she should just be ready every time, just in case something happens. But it's very strategy related before the race. Mid-race, it's her communicating or yelling at me, what's going on, who's where, if something's going on, or just words of encouragement, which is always nice. And then post-race, that's probably one of my favorite parts about open water is the post-race just chats, just getting everyone's perspective from the race, but with the coach afterwards, talking about what went well, what worked, what didn't work, because I'm pretty good at forgetting things, so I need to talk about it right away because I don't take swimming home with me. So I'll talk about what happened, where I felt good, where I didn't, and it's really evolved over time of what sort of nutrition I needed during a race, and it changed by location, different. Like if it was hot, I would need something different than if it was a cold race.
Yeah. You know, the thing about the feeding station, a lot of coaches choose not to feed. You may see another staff member that's down there feeding. I always prefer to be the one on the feeding station because that's the only chance you really have to put your eyes on your athlete. And so for me, that's what I would always choose to do. A lot of times it means you have to leave from the start area where your athlete's getting transponders. You know, some coaches like to be the last person that their athlete sees. So that, you know, the choice for me to always be on the feeding dock, you know, I thought that was good. Again, the athlete has to navigate through the feed, but the coach does as well. Like, it's important if I tell Haley I'm going to be in this part of the pontoon, like, she's going to trust that I'm there. I might have to fight a couple coaches from other countries, but generally, like, I need to be where I told her. And I guess, what would you use the first loop? Like, how would you? Let's say we couldn't talk about it ahead of time. You know, what?
Yeah, at bigger races, you normally had an assigned spot, but at World Cup races or nationals, there's no assigned spot. It's just first come, first serve, wherever your coach gets. So sometimes I use the first lap, the first go around to spot where she was, and I had this pink tank top for her that I made her wear in most races that I could really see. It was very, very bright, and so that always helped too. It seems so silly and simple, but it really does work.
I think just coming down to again, talking about the stress that the athletes are managing over 2 hours of a race, you know, if that's something, if I'm communicating, Haley, you're in 5th place right now, you know, we talk ahead of time, is that what she wants to know? Some athletes, I would say Ashley Twitchell wanted to know how many seconds ahead or behind. So, you know, when you're feeding, not only are you dealing with the correct feed, you're also thinking, okay, what information do I need to communicate? Because it's very limited, it is different than the pool. A lot of times you can signal to your athlete, you know, you're on pace, you're not, you know, she'll come by for 3 seconds and then I'm like, okay, I don't see her again for 25 more minutes, or, you know, in some cases 40 minutes. So it can be, you know, a lot can be going on with her, a lot is going on in my mind as well.
Yeah, I also always wanted to know what lap I was on, because like there's not as many laps in an open water race, but sometimes you're doing 8 laps and you're just like, okay, I think that was 3, could be 4. Like you lose track of time and you start doubting yourself on if you counted correctly. But then it was always like, okay, wait, is she gonna tell me I'm starting lap 4 or that I finished lap 4? I'm like, is that what that meant? Like, so that's something you have to say, like pre-race, like, okay, tell me what lap I'm going to be on, or tell me what lap I'm currently on.
So you have to tell me, right? The national.
Oh, there was just like nationals where we're like, let's try something new, because that's what we like to do. Is at different races, trying out new things to see what sticks, what doesn't, and this didn't stick. We're like, okay, let's feed at the beginning of the pontoon, because we normally feed at the end or something like that. And so I come around for my feed and I forget completely that we're doing this. I go to the end of the dock and I'm like, where is she?
She swam right past me and all the coaches are looking at me and I was like, what did you yell?
I was like, I yelled that word. I was like, where are you? There's another word in there. And I was pretty mad with going around that whole loop. And then I was like, oh no, I told her to be at the beginning. And so I came around again. And I was like, I'm so sorry. Like, that was me.
All the coaches are like,
she's so mad at you.
She's pissed. You are not where you said you would be.
I was mad until I realized it was my fault.
Yeah.
So she was where she was supposed to be. I wasn't.
That rarely happened, but you know, again, these are all stories that you learn from, and then you know you have to take these and help put them together and not make the same mistake again, because that's what open water racing is. You're going to make mistakes in the middle of these 2-hour races. You are going to miss a feed. You are going to, you know, someone's going to push you off course. You can't control those things, and it's just important to not let it get you off track. Some of the strategies of just practicing feeding. So earlier on, I would say we do some open water stuff, like, or I bring a feeding stick to the pool, or in a training camp, we might practice with a new feeding stick. I think Steve Nunatona has actually invented this grab, gulp, and go. Grabbing is obviously swimming over and grabbing the water bottle out of the feeding stick. The gulp, that really, I feel like it's one thing athletes sometimes tend to be in such a hurry to get through this feeding station that they don't actually ingest any of the nutrition. The whole reason you're coming off your course to go to this feeding station is to get your nutrition. It's like you may as well make sure you get as much as you can, and then you just want to get the hell out of there, because so many things can happen if you can get stuck between different other countries' feeding sticks, other people. There again more things that can just go wrong. So
yeah, it's good to practice like drinking a full Gatorade bottle, or not a full one, but so that was something I would practice too, like in the middle of practice, being like, okay, can I chug half the Gatorade right now? How do I feel afterwards? Like, how is it sitting in my stomach? So that's something you need to practice as well. Like, okay, am I going to have to feed like a little bit multiple times, or can I chug a whole Gatorade bottle with a goo in it and whatever once for a race? And so that's something that took quite a few years of practice, is getting my feeds down to one. And making sure I really got everything in there, because that was something I was not good at. After my first Olympics, I literally was anemic on 9-gag, and it was a Gatorade just pouring on my face, not in my mouth. And all my college friends sent it to me so it really took some practice that even at the Olympics I didn't get right, and it still went okay.
I think too, how would you say your strategy would be different with a feed at, let's say, a U.S. Nationals where there are maybe 15 or 20 girls versus the Olympic Games where there are 25 athletes, and then World Championships where you have 70 people possibly all heading through the feed at the same time?
So there's definitely, sometimes at World Championships there's 2 feeding dogs, so that leads into a lot of strategy too on like where you're at, who's like, it just adds so many different components to like, who's going to feed when, at what time, like can I make a move by not feeding and passing some people. So yeah, like when you're at a nationals with only 20 other girls, like it's okay to feed and like take your time, nothing's really going to happen. Sometimes people take that time to like really make a break for it, so you really have to be aware of what's going on. And then World Championships, when there's 70 people, it's chaos, it's crazy. So that was one of my strategies of getting down to one feed and getting everything I needed in one go. So then I didn't have to deal with the hustle and bustle of the feeding station. It was like a NASCAR. I always called it a NASCAR pit stop, except for it wasn't as quick.
Yeah, I sometimes I think too, I wonder, having done this for 15 years, like, are we over talking the idea of a feed? In 2005, when I was coaching Chip, he was really struggling with taking a gel in his suit, and in the middle of the race being able to roll over on his back and take this gel. We were able to master it pretty well. He ended up doing that in the 10K in Montreal with about 2,000 to go. And he had energy at the end and was able to pull it off. But who knows, was it confidence that he actually had some type of nutrition? Was it just, fear, the excitement? You never know. But you have to give your athlete lots of different tools to be able to be successful. And then in 2008, I watched David Davies. He was a miler in the pool, and I want to say it was one of his first open water races. This is when the first qualification happened, and he did not feed at all. He led from start to finish. He was not always on course, but it didn't matter. Everybody followed him, and he didn't stop one time. And I think I remember all the coaches being like, "Oh my God, he didn't feed. Oh my gosh." Now that's going to come back to bite you in a 10K or a 25K. And again, something else to take into consideration is just the different venues where these races are held. Like in 2008, it was in Spain, and it was in May. Pretty mild air temperature, mild water temperature, but we're talking Tokyo. We all know how hot that water was, so that's going to change how you feed. Rio was only 4 laps, and in the middle of an ocean, huge waves, so you really only had 3 opportunities to feed. And London was pretty flat and relatively easy to navigate that feeding station. So.
Sometimes the feeding stations aren't exactly on course. They're as close as they can be. So that also determines like how far are you swimming off the course to get to this feeding station. Is it worth it to add this like So that was another reason why we wanted to work on some different strategies that we could put into place. But yeah, like she said, if a race was hotter, then we need more hydration during the race. But
okay, these are just two pictures. I randomly threw this in because sometimes these feeding dogs do, sometimes we're submerged. So this is just my little list for coaches. Ron, you can tell me if I missed anything here, but so we start out bringing our own water bottles because you go to these countries and you have no idea if they have like the wide lip Gatorade bottles. That was always easier for Haley to get the.
I was particular.
Yeah, she's
I
a
like
female. So I remember one race we bring all the bottles. We thought we were so smart in bringing all of our own bottles that we forgot to rinse them out and mold. Because 2 weeks later, after 2 weeks of training camp, I'm like, oh, you have your good bottles that we brought. Oops. Bring a bathing suit because, like I said, I was at a race in Cancun, and at Cancun I didn't really mind being in the water feeding. That was really a World Cup, and that was pretty fun. There was a typhoon in Korea. 2019, so it's just important to always pack for the elements, staying chill and relaxed. Like, these things don't go your way. If I'm freaked out, that's only going to freak my athlete out. As Haley mentioned, have a system of counting laps. Like, as a coach, I remember in Tokyo, the Italian coach, Ultraneering's coach, came up to me. He's like, "What lap are they on?" I was like, I don't know. And I didn't want to mess up because I'm like, then I'm going to mess up another time. Well, maybe I do want to mess this up. Honestly, there's so many things going on. It's just important to make sure you have a system of how you're counting your laps. Duct tape. Athletes are duct taping. You've seen pre-race things. We're taping transponders. We're taping caps, goggles. The cup at times has fallen off the end of my feeding stick. Nothing a little duct tape can't fix. As I said, you're sometimes out on these docks for like 2 hours for a 10K, 6 hours for a 25K. You're just making new friends. There's a Polish coach that brought some vodka on one of the feeding docks, and he did get asked to leave. But these are just experiences that you're like, you just can't make this stuff up. So, do you have any advice? Okay, don't need to add anything else. So drafting, we all know drafting is one of the most important tactics in open water racing. I think about cycling, how important it is to save your energy. You never know when you're going to need it. Are you saving it for a turn? Maybe you're saving it for the feeding pontoon. Maybe you're saving it for the finish. I think a lot of this does depend on the type of course, the conditions, if it's rough water or if it's flat water, and then how many competitors are in the race. And Haley kind of talked a little bit about would she prefer to be on somebody's feet, somebody's hip. But all these things took time to learn race after race after race. And if you can conserve 20%, I think scientifically they've said maybe 10, 20, maybe even 20% through drafting, why would you not try to learn how to do this? Now, some people love to be the lead swimmer. So maybe talk about your evolution of drafting.
Yeah, so everyone has their preference on where they feel most comfortable. If they're on someone's feet or if they're on someone's hip. It really is personal preference. I always liked drafting on someone's feet. It was a lot easier to maintain contact and touch their feet a little bit as I just know that I was right there. But yeah, you conserve a lot of energy, but I do understand why some people like to lead because you're not having to deal with 5 people right next to you. So sometimes you can just be like, okay, I'm gonna lead for a minute and just, it might calm you down, but it is really important to draft. And it's not always perfect. Waves and the chop and the wind can sort of like move you around and bump you around. So you really have to be vigilant and make sure you're where you need to be because there's definitely times where you are just swimming along, your brain wanders, and then you wander. You're no longer on their feet. You're like, oh shoot, like where'd they go? So being aware of your surroundings is really important. Making sure you know where the lead swimmer is. Making sure I typically towards the end of my career, I was more comfortable in the back of the pack for the first 5K, the first hour, and then I'd work my way up.
That kind of started to stress me out.
Yeah, because she was like, you know where you're at, right? You're 40. I'll get there, don't worry. So being comfortable and confident with where you're at and where you can go, and making sure there's where the lead person is, so knowing like, okay, I still see the lead person out there, we're good, no one's broken away yet, so.
Would you say it's annoying when somebody's on your feet or your hips, and how do you handle, maybe?
Yeah, it definitely adds a level of stress when someone's on your feet, but for the most part, for touching my feet, I'm okay. Sometimes someone can really get up on your legs and be touching, like, someone was touching the back of my knees one time. I was like, you're not getting anything, like, sitting there, like, get your own space. So it can really be stressful, but you have to stay calm. It doesn't always work. It didn't always work for me, but just trying to stay as calm as possible for as long as possible.
And then I think another big one is just trusting instincts. Like as a coach, this was always the fun part for me, was coming up with a strategy, talking to Haley about it, or whatever the American athlete that we're working with, what's your strategy going to be? And then there are so many moments in that race as a coach I cannot communicate, and the athlete needs to learn how to make an adjustment. All of a sudden I have the lead. What do I do? Do I continue with the lead? Do I worry about who's behind me? And so I think over time, Haley really learned to trust her instincts, and that's why I think getting more opportunities to race is really important. What would you do? What would you do to, let's say, the pack splits into two? I mean, who do you follow?
Yeah, so it definitely happens sometimes. Everyone thinks they have the best line. I'm biased. I thought I had the best line all the time. I have really good eyesight. Directionally, I'm great. But it wasn't always the case. Sometimes you want to stay with a certain pack. So this is when you have to know who's who and where they're at, because you see the pack splitting into two and it's coming down to the last 800-meter stretch. You're like, who am I going to follow? Am I going to follow this young girl I don't know and I've never heard of? Am I going to follow this experienced swimmer, or am I going to follow this fast finisher? You know what I mean? So you have to know who's who, where they're at, and you need to follow your instincts to make that split second decision on you're going left, you're going right, and committing to it. You can't have you can't second guess yourself. You really have to commit and go all in, because if you can't be confident in what you decided, then it's probably not going to work out well.
You can't look back. It's just like you gotta go. And then when you're leading, do you worry about who's behind you?
I mean, I would worry about it, but I tried not to think about it depended on where I was in the race. If it was the end of the race and I was in the lead, I was giddy, and I was just excited and had a little bit of fear to light that fire, keep going.
Yeah. Have you ever been yellow carded or red carded?
I've been yellow carded most of the time. Most of the time, yellow cards, when they happen, I've been hit before, and I've most of the time I'm like, okay, that wave bumped you into me, your elbow in my goggles. It's probably an accident. But I did get yellow carded 5 minutes into the race in London, going around a turn. I still don't know what I did, but that stuff happens. And
that was my communication to you at that meeting.
Yeah, you're like,
you have a yellow card.
You got a yellow card. I was like, I know, I saw it. I'm so sorry. And I just stayed away from everybody the rest of the race. I'm not risking another yellow card, which is a red card. But most of the time, it's on accident. You can really tell when someone hits you on purpose. At least I think I can. I'm like, yeah, they knew what they were doing.
Yeah, and early on, I think we did talk about learning drafting just in pool, and we did a little bit more open water practice early on in Haley's career. The fun part about open water is you get a group of people together. So I'm convincing all the other distance swimmers at USC, come on guys, we're gonna go to Long Beach and I'll rent 3 kayaks, and that might be a violation, so don't take it. But just having a group of people and then all going out to breakfast afterwards. Those are things that I feel like those people then feel like when Haley's successful, yeah, I helped guide her and play a part in this. Okay, turns, they can be rough. I've seen athletes go in the 3rd place and you get spit out, you're 10th place. It can be a washing machine at times. there are different types of buoys. So some of them are a little bit more like sausage shaped that will kind of like
guide you, like softly guide you to where you're going, where it's like you see the buoy up here, it's just uphill. There's some that have that like pill shape, but then have like a sausage around it, so it kind of like leads you and spits you out to where you're going.
Those are a little bit better.
Yeah.
But you know, I think one of the things I always try to say is like protect your position. So just make sure you're taking up as much space as you can in and around the turn. You know, if you're speeding up and if you can lead a group of people into that turn, chances are you're going to be able to hold on to your position coming out. Around the turns is where a lot of times the pack will just end up well, yeah, it'll get together and then it's afterwards.
Everyone is like speeding up, trying to get into a different position, going into a turn. There's always people making moves. They want to be in a better position than where they're at. So that's when the most chaos happens, is coming into a turn. All of a sudden, everyone's speeding up, and then afterwards, it's sort of like what shook out, like what.
Yeah. And a lot of times, those official boats aren't like on the other side of the turn looking to see what's happening. So a lot of times, this is where some of those dunks happen because you know, people are just fighting for that position. And I guess that's another thing, you know, maybe over time you learn I'm gonna be relaxed around this because I'm not in a good place, and
I'm not gonna fight it, I'm not gonna worry.
Right, but just managing the frustrations. I mean, I could say, you know, after the race, I'll be like, Haley, you came out of that turn and you were like 15. And then it's like, she has to spend so much more energy to get back up to the position where she wants to be. And this is all part of that strategy in that game, and learning, like, do I go to the tank now? You know, the turns, a team was disqualified at the last World Championships, I believe, in the team relay for missing a turn. Like, that should not happen. And so as a coach, it's important that your athletes know the course, okay, ask questions very clearly, what turn, number 1, number 2, number 3. Sometimes they're all left-hand turns, sometimes they're right-hand. But you know, that's a sad time for those athletes and that relay team that gets disqualified for not knowing the you know, the order of the turns, and that's on that. So I guess that's on all of them. But you know, I just think it's important to know. And sighting, you know, early on we see some athletes on the national team and they're lifting their head up like every 3 strokes. It's like, oh, you guys are making me tired just watching you. Like, put your head down, swim. Actually, we used to do this drill where you take your goggles off and just swim straight for like, you know, 10, 15 strokes to kind of see what direction you go. It's always fun. You can do that in the pool too.
Yes, sighting is really important. So getting on the course ahead of a race is really important to know your surroundings and to use those landmarks. Because sometimes it's really sunny and you're not going to be able to see anything. So knowing what time is the race, getting on the course at that within that window, knowing your surroundings. Like, okay, I may not be able to see this buoy that's 1,000 meters away, but there's a hotel that's blue right behind it, and I'll be able to sight off of that. So knowing landmarks and knowing where things are at as you're going, because there's not always going to be. Another thing is to make sure to really communicate or ask questions in the technical briefing of, like, okay, is the lead boat leading? Are they just following where the lead swimmer's going, or are they actually like on course and they're leading?
Yeah. I think a lot of times it's frustrating for coaches. Like, you'll be told, okay, the course is going to be open, the athletes can get out there and swim a loop of the course, and you'll have this whole plan. All right, this afternoon we're going to go to the course, we're going to do a loop, and then you get there and they're like, nope, the course is closed, so no chance to get on. It's like, okay, so we'll do our best. That's another example of just kind of having to go with the flow. But I always think it's good to have your athletes just get out to the course even before they are racing, to just, you know, like Haley said, kind of look at some of the local landmarks, things like that. You know, and the sighting might be different. Like, if you have 25 people in a race, you're probably not as I mean, is that harder or easier than having 70?
If there's 25 people in the race, I'm probably not sighting as much. If the race is wavy and there's a lot of waves, I'm probably sighting a little bit more, but I'm also timing those strokes. Because if you're sighting and a wave is coming at you and you can't see past the wave, that was a wasted one. So really being intentional with when you're sighting and knowing like what the conditions are going to be.
Yeah, I mean, and again, sometimes you don't know. It's important to ask questions about what buoys are what. A lot of times they have turn buoys that are one color. They might have directional buoys, and it doesn't matter which side you are on for those buoys. A lot of times they kind of help the athlete get to the next buoy. I always felt like Haley was really excellent at making the decision of like, is this the shortest way to the buoy, or am I going to stay with this person, let them lead, and then I'm going to take over? And so just little things like that, I think, came obviously over time and with confidence that grows. So yeah, turns are.
So this is a great example of like a 2-hour race can come down to like a fraction of a second at the very end. So like those 3 people coming in, you probably thought that the middle person was going to come in second, but the other person next to her on the left ended up coming in second. So it really is pretty crazy to have 2-hour races really come down to a touch like this.
And I think a lot of times, we're telling athletes to like set up the finish with 1,000 to go, set up the finish with 100 meters to go. So many things change in the course of even the last 15, 20 meters. So many races are coming down to the touch. Are you reaching for the touch pad? If you miss, your transponder does not indicate that you have finished that race. You have to actually engage, touch the pad. And so, again, we always like to get on the course and practice these finishes. But, you can practice like this in a pool. You can, make some mock finish, even have an imaginary one. But I think it's important to know that, the finishes can come down to missing a medal just because of that. So, I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about maybe finding some qualities that are important in open water swimmers or distance swimmers. It can be a little bit of a lonely world out there. 6-hour race for 25K, as Haley said, your mind can wander. You can go to some dark places. You just need to have a good song in your head or something. But your mind can go. And so these are just some things that came to mind of some of the athletes that I've worked with. We obviously have to have endurance, right? A 1-hour race is a 5K, 10K is about 2, and 25K, we're looking at 6 hours. At the end of the day, you just have to have a great base. Haley had that when she came to USC, and I felt like that was something that we could always build upon. There may be times in her career where she said, I think I need to do more, maybe I need to do less, and as a coach, it's my job to listen to sort of the things that she thinks about. But there are no walls to sit and rest here. So even if you do a 10K in practice, like you have a flip turn all the time. The open water is 100% different. There are turns, there are all the things that we've talked about. That's a different challenge. And I do love that you have to have speed, right? That's the other fun thing as a coach. You get to work on all these different aspects. It's not just long, boring distance swimming.
Yeah, you're seeing more really successful swimmers starting to do open water and being good in it. So having that closing speed is still important to be able to finish with a good kick and a strong kick at the end.
Yeah. And consistency. Obviously, anything you do, you want to be consistent. But Haley was really consistent at always coming to practice with an open mind. So
it's racing. It's important to sort of stick with it and not just do one race every other year. If you want to really be good at something, you got to try it multiple times before it really works.
being flexible, adaptable, and coachable. I mean, that's not just for the athletes, although that is something that I feel like is required to be successful over all these years. Coachable for the athletes, I love that Haley can go off to another training camp or something and maybe look at 3 different coaches' workouts, and she might say, you know what, I think I need this today. This looks like this. It was always hard for me to write practices like 4 days in advance. I mean, it's hard to know where your athlete is, what they're doing. Over time, she knows what she needs. Have to trust that. And even for coaches, like I learned, I would say, you know, Chip was very different as a 15-year-old. And in London, I was with WOWSA as well, and he was 28, I think. But you know, the qualified race in Portugal, I'm telling him like, okay, I think we need to get down to the course. You at least need to try to get on the course. And he's like, that water is freezing cold. I'm not getting on that course. I was like, okay, so this is a moment I can either force him to go do this or be like, okay, then I'll tell you what I think you need. And you got to be willing to go. And so that was an instance where as a coach, I'm like, I'm going to listen to this athlete. I'm going to trust he knows what he's doing. And, you know, that worked out pretty well. You know, being able to relinquish some control as a coach is important. It's important for me to look around and observe, you know, I don't want to do the same thing all the time. Then we're going to get the same results all the time. And I think for Haley having, you know, I'd love for you to touch on how you qualified for 2012 versus Kazan in 2015. And then in 2019, you won a silver medal in the 10K.
So in 2012, I was still fairly new. I'd started open water in 2010, so I didn't think I was going to make it. But I went to Portugal and was like, I need to win this race. And so that's how we set up leading into Portugal. Was like, okay, this is, you need to top 2 here. You need to win this race. And that's what happened. Before Rio in 2015, it was a little different mentally. I was like, okay, I just need to get top 10, and it was a pretty stressful time too, so just getting top 10, I was like, okay, like we can do that, and I ended up getting 9th, so I was like, okay, like I did what I said I was going to do. I wasn't happy with it, but then 2019, I was like, okay, our mindset was like, I'm going to get on the podium, and so it was really interesting to see like how those goals really played into everything, and so I ended up getting 2nd in 2019.
And I think in 2019, I want to say Haley was like 15th or 11th coming around that last turn. And I had a coach.
Going into the turn, I was like 14th or whatever, and there was like the last turn.
There's maybe 800 to go.
Yeah.
And I had a coach come over to me. It's like, oh, I'm so sorry. And, you know, it's like the race isn't over until it's over. Okay, there was 10 minutes, and actually the girl who was leading at that time ended up 11th and not making the Olympic Games. So, I mean, this stuff, it is, you just have to stay flexible. You have to, you know, learn each time. You know, again, embracing the work. I love that being able to say, like, I coach open water. Like, those athletes, they're not afraid. They are not afraid to do the work. They are not afraid to get in these bodies of water that it's like, you want me to get in there? And
It's
just has
actually,
the pride.
I was going to say, it's like a point of pride to be like, yes, I'm doing 25K, yes, I do 10K. It's like, I just did the hardest practices in the pool today. Like, that's always like a point of pride for me, at least. Like, okay, no one's working harder, no one's doing something crazy like this.
I mean, and this last piece of just commitment and trust, I would say, you know, not to have a working relationship with an athlete for 11 years. I think Haley and I have grown in so many different ways. It's important to know she was different at 19 than she was at 24 than at 28. So I really think that's like a testament to her for trusting me, and then for me to be able to trust that she's doing what she needs. And you know, I think more than anything, like more than any medal, I'm just more proud of how she was able to sustain what she did over all these years, and just to have a tremendous impact on me and what I learned.
Yeah, going off to college at 17 and really starting to work with Catherine at like a young age like that, and then through Tokyo, we've seen a lot, we've been through a lot. So by the time when I was 17 to Tokyo at 29, a lot has changed,
So I just threw this picture up at the end. I have no idea how we are on time because. Okay. Anyway, this was a World Cup in Cozumel. Selfishly, I was like, ooh, May, Mexico. College season is over. Haley, let's go see what we can do in Cozumel. And we get there, we find out the race course is like, I think it was 8 loops. I mean, talk about a NASCAR race. Like, oh my God, I don't even know if we have enough feeding bottles for this. But she won. And I think this is the first race where she really established herself. Everybody on the in the international field really respected her at this point because sometimes winning a World Cup race, you just, I don't know,
They
explain.
were like, okay, I was like, I don't want a silver medal in London, but they were definitely more like, okay, like you have something to prove. Yeah.
But you know, yeah.
I guess we can open up to questions now.
Yeah. Anyone have any questions?
Strategizing in the middle of the race, you're drafting off people. I'm assuming you know that you're in the first group, second group. There's always somewhat of a little break in between. Now you're trying to figure out when is it that you're trying to really think about breaking out for that finish, being able to get back into the lead, because I know you're wanting to draft off, your faster swimmers, so you're not pulling everybody along. What is it in your head that you're going through on your thought processes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, I always have like a plan A, B, and C, and D, and further down the line. So you have a lot of things that like you could pull out. And so my goal is to always position myself well for the last 5K and to maintain as much or conserve as much energy the first 5K, and then the second 5K is just to be in a good position, be drafting, and then be working my way up, whether that's still being in towards the back of the pack or wherever, but working my way up and always making good moves and trusting, having confidence in the moves that I'm making and the decisions that I'm making, because that is a hard thing to be like, okay, I am going to pass these 3 people, I've been drafting off them, I've been in a comfortable position, but it's time to pass this line of girls, and so working on that, executing it, having confidence in it, and then doing it, not backing off, being like, okay, that didn't feel great, like I'm a little tired right now, because you're always doubting yourself, and so it's always really important to have some more positive thoughts than negative thoughts. You're always going to have negative thoughts, that's a given, but it's to outweigh all those negative thoughts with more positive thoughts and being like really sticking with what you're deciding.
If you're leading, how often are you citing? How many strokes are you citing, and how many strokes are you citing if you're in a pack? That's my first one. And my second one is, if somebody's on your feet and they're touching your feet, how many times do you let them touch you before you start kicking them in the head?
Those are very good questions. So yeah, you're definitely citing a little bit more if you're leading the pack, and depending on the conditions of the course. So you're citing more when you're leading than when you're following and drafting.
Like every 20 strokes?
It was more just like, it was more like a feel, like it depended on if there was waves or if there was directional buoys. But I'd say yeah, probably every like 20, and definitely less when we're following someone drafting. My go-to was never to like kick someone that was on my feet, depending on how annoying they were being, but I would try to move away or like lead them away and then come back to the pack, or just like dead stop and let them go. And be like, okay, I'm gonna drop off you now and touch your feet annoyingly.
Christine, and then those.
Are there any technical differences in your stroke in how you swim in like open water in Hawaii versus a lake that's flat, or strategies for a 1 to 2 hour race?
Yeah, well, I always needed to work on lengthening out my stroke because I'm 5'10", but I swam like I was 5'2". That's something she always told me. So it was always like, okay, lengthen out your stroke, like try to be as like long and smooth as possible. And it's harder to do when there's waves and chop to really lengthen out your stroke. And it was more just like a phrasing to stay calm and relaxed.
We did a lot of work with a snorkel, and a lot of people were like, I don't know why you're having her swim so much with a snorkel on. But I really felt like what was more important was like her engaging her catch and working on that rather than the breathing. Like, I don't know, I'd rather see you swim fast all the time than worrying about, a breath here and there. So, yep.
Hi, so with going off of her question to piggyback, I specifically don't train like competitively like my guys. It's just candidates for SEAL training, so it's kind of just trying to get to a time limit within X amount of time. What we struggle with a lot with the newer candidates coming into the pipeline is, the sighting piece, right? Obviously identifying landmarks. Now, do you find that, you said 20 strokes typically, something like that with your, I'm assuming that's freestyle, correct? Is that just situationally dependent with like the caliber of candidate or athlete you have in front of you? Do you go further than that?
Yeah, like if I trust the person in front of me and I'm like, okay, you're good at leading, you're good at your directions, like, because I know there's some people out there, like I know I've raced with, it was 12 years of knowing some of the same people, so like, okay, don't trust her signing abilities, like she doesn't know where she's going. There are certain people you do trust, so like you do learn that. I've helped some friends get ready for some triathlons, and they hated goggles. They're like, I can't see anything. And I'm like, to us, like we're used to like looking through goggles and knowing like what you're seeing is. But like all my friends had the same complaint about goggles. Like, I can't see with goggles on. I'm like, I can't see without them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think too, learning that the sighting comes from like a lift up and then continuation into the stroke. And so not spending, like, I don't think Haley ever took 2 strokes in a row with her head up. So she got to a point where it was like, I'm looking up
and into a breath. So I would sight and then immediately turn my head like I was taking a breath. It wasn't just like up and down. It was looking up and sighting and then turning to the side. For me, that was easier to continue on into my stroke.
You gave kind of a brief overview of what your load during your training season. How does it start at the beginning, middle part of the season, and then eventually later?
It was definitely different when I was in college because there's more competitions you had to get ready for. Like the college season really backed up into our first open water race in spring. But, I mean, she's the one that can tell you about my training. I don't remember anything.
That's the good thing about Haley. She doesn't really remember anything. So, no, I think that one of the criticisms of open water is that we have this college season as well, and trying to find a way to have our athletes ready to swim fast in open water and also balance other competitions like the pool and college swimming. Dave and I at USC, we really felt like Haley would be able to be good in February, March, and then still be able to crush it in April for open water nationals. We're not doing huge tapers, so I don't feel like a week of NCAAs was ever really detrimental to anything. I don't think I ever felt like we were unprepared.
Yeah, I never did a long taper. That was never like something I did. So it wasn't like I was out of shape after like a big competition. Like my junior year leading into London, I didn't even taper for NC2As, and it still went well. I think I won the 500 that year at NC2As, and then went off to qualify for open water because I was like, hey, this is important. This is happening once. Like,
yeah, I mean, I don't know that you have to do. I would say our volume pretty much stayed the same throughout most of the season. We really didn't have a training cycle where all of a sudden we're going 10K for these 3 weeks. Very rarely did Haley ever do 9-10K in a practice, I would say. We tried this year, last year.
I went to swim March Chamber my last year. I was in a lot of 10Ks at that point.
But I mean, I felt like we always wanted to look for getting some speed out of those practices. I mean, you can still get a lot out of 7,000 practice. And then even when we were at an event like NCAAs or Pac-12s, it's like coming back, you just kind of reset. It's like, okay, you need to go in easy practice here. I'm not going to worry about the volume. Just swim easy for an hour and a half. That should do it. I'm not super scientific and neither was Dave in saying that we have to follow a very strict yardage or training plan. I've always tried as a coach to work backwards from what our goal was. So if I knew that Portugal in 2012 was going to have currents, so in February there was a race in Argentina, and I was like, Haley, you might have to miss a cow stand for a dual meet. I think you need to go swim at this race. So there's a lot of travel to get to Argentina, to ride on a bus for a couple hours, to swim in a river that had currents. But I was more willing to let her miss a week of training, whatever it was, to be able to give her the experience of you finished 4th at a World Cup in a race with currents. So I tend to look at more of like, what are we looking for? What is this open water venue going to be like? Kind of work backwards from there, I guess.
Catherine, what are the last 3 days like before a race? What kind of taper do you do? Is there any pool, or do you just do one lap of the course if they let you? Or
A lot of coaches are different. A lot of coaches want to control what's happening in the pool those 3 days out. I felt like the day before the race was always like course, just getting comfortable on the course. So I'm like, we're not even going to look at the pool the day before the race. And maybe even sometimes 2 days out. And a lot of times it would depend on if we've seen the course before or something similar. There's a lot of talking about just hydration, resting legs, things like that.
You really don't
4 to 5
much. I mean,
it's a drop. Like
it's more of a drop in, not distance, more intensity.
There was always like one set we would either rotate through. I don't know if you remember. It was like a set of 850s. But there's always these 850s where you just do long course, and depending on how it looked, it'd either be like, okay, descend by 2s. Generally go like 3 sets of them. So one round would be on 50, one round would be on 40, and then one round would be on a minute. And so I want her to get each set of 8 faster. The 3 broken 400s. I mean, I'm looking at that as the last 1200 of a race. And kind of setting her up mentally in that way. I think more than anything, it's conserving the energy. It's so much energy spent traveling on these buses, getting to the open water. You're there an hour and a half before you race. That's energy spent that I don't want spent in a practice at a pool, because we want her to be fresh. I want her brain fresh. I want the legs fresh. It's staying back in the afternoon and making sure your legs are rested. Like I'd always prefer to probably do a morning swim rather than an afternoon.
But I think like 3 days out, like I still did a double. Second day, probably maybe 2 open water swims, depending on like how easy it was to get to the. Sometimes it's easier to get to the venue, like if you walk to the venue instead of taking a bus to the pool. So depending on the ease of stuff, and then day before getting on the venue, practicing some benches, and then resting up.
It's kind of an art.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Haley's kind of touched on it already, and we're from Britain, but it seems pretty evident that when we were successful back in 2008, 2012, our best swimmers come out of the pool. And you look at a lot of the European nations right now, all their better open water swimmers, or generally, they're pretty good in the pool. Is there a strategy, you might know the answer, you might not, is there a strategy in the US at the minute around being able to identify those swimmers in the pool and then maybe transition into open water, or anything that you're doing specifically around that?
Yeah, sure. I think that's one of the things that we are looking at in the United States is like how deep are our distance swimmers, how fast are our milers. I do think that you need to have, as I've alluded to, speed to be good in these races, especially in the international field. I also think that the athletes, the Europeans right now, are racing open water and they're training open water more than the Americans are. So I don't know that you can take a fast pool swimmer and just throw them in an open water race and expect a result. I put a high value on open water racing, and I think that the Europeans, they have so many opportunities to race, and I feel here we lack that. We have to travel so far to attend any race, and I'm willing to do that, but some coaches are not. We have the college system to deal with. But I would say 2008 as well, that was also a pretty flat course, And so we're also looking at that water, right? Like, I mean, those pool athletes was like Cassie Patton and Carrie Payne. And it was also like success right back to back to back, which is another reason I think we should look at our qualification system and like let's grasp the best athletes from the most recent, you know, performance. I don't know they're always selecting a year out. I mean, we've made it work, you know, but I don't know. I think we need to give our American athletes more opportunities and exposure to racing open water.
Yeah, because the European pool swimmers, they're invested in open water. Their coaches are invested in open water. So therefore, they're going to be more willing. You know what I mean? Here it's more like pool versus open water.
I think I saw that early on. It was like, oh, all the Europeans are racing. Those are the ones winning. We need to go find that. And, you know, how can we go mirror, you know, what they're doing?
Maybe I don't have to pose the same question that you posed to Ron earlier. I mean, what would be your ideas or thoughts around
Ron to answer that.
trying to get to what you're talking about right there is get our elite athletes ideally just swimming more aggressively.
Let me tell you, the Europeans will come, the South Americans will come. It needs to be in a city. Miami did a great job hosting. I would love to see some type of racing opportunity there. The problem is the racing calendar and making sure that it fits in a time. I feel in the United States we're worried about like, well, where is this tier pro swim series? Where is this college meet? Where is this? We're so worried about that rather than take the bull by, like we need to say that this is when our nationals are. We're going to open it to international athletes. We're going to promote it. We're going to actually post the race information like 3 months before the race. Let coaches know, have a plan, run a 1 mile, something or other to let everybody get on a course, you know? But I think we need to find some consistency in how we're doing that.
You have to take consistency. It's not going to happen overnight. Like we need to keep hosting races. We can't just be like, well, that was kind of a flop. Like we're not doing that there again. Like I think it's really important to set up something and just sort of like commit to it and really. Yeah, because it's not. Yeah, like you said, it's not going to happen the first year. It might happen the second year, but like you really have to be consistent.
And another thing that brings on is like. Even sometimes our national team wouldn't show up to our nationals. And that was always kind of a pet peeve for me. I'm like, if we're hosting an open water event, our entire national team for open water should be there regardless of what time it is. If we're committed to this sport, you know, we have to show up, we have to support it. And then the worst part that it would put us in is like, I'm like, okay, Haley, nobody's going to this race. Like, is it worth going to Florida and traveling all the way there when we know nobody is gonna be there, right? That kind of takes away from the plan. It's like we want to race.
Nationals or something. And how many open water races are you going to go to? Like we talked about going to find a current or finding that. How many are you trying to hit in a season training for nationals or World Cup?
So I would just back up, like just for example, in 2018. That was a year Haley and I talked about doing 3 10Ks in a row. So 3 weekends in a row, back to back to back. So she's gone for 3 weeks, you know.
But like making the most of like a circuit, like it was a European, like the first race was in France, the second race was Portugal, the last race was in Hungary. So like we're already over here, like we're gonna make the most out of these 3 races that we have access to. But not every calendar is kind of like that, but just trying to pick out 2 to 3 races that were beneficial in the end goal of like, hey, what races do we think people are really gonna gravitate towards, and what's the finish, like what's the last race, like what is our world championships and what are our nationals, like what do we need to get ready for?
Right, and I mean Doha is really hard to get to, but it was like I felt like that was an important race we need to go to. But again, it's like working backwards from whatever. If that was a wetsuit race, I'm like, okay, we don't know if there's going to be a wetsuit race, and you know, let's make sure we show up. So I don't know that it's necessarily the number of races, but it's thinking about what does your athlete need to close that gap, right? Does it need to be a pool race, and then 3 weeks later? I always found doing an open water 10K, and then about 3 weeks later, if you race in a pool, there was always a really great performance there. And that's coming back from an open water race and not pushing.
I had some of my best tapers.
Yeah.
For races after an open water race. So.
And it's not the 7,000 practice. It's just like, okay, this is a lot shorter than, you know, the ocean. So I don't know there's a number per se, but like, you know, based on athlete and then figuring out, you know, sometimes it's just good to teach a kid to win, right? Like just win a race. Know how that feels. Know how it feels to get just crushed, because I mean, that's not a good feeling. Like, like.
Talking about some of the changes you'd like to see within USA swimming related to competitions and hosting your own events, but internationally, opportunities are really limited at the Olympic level. Are there any specific changes you'd like to see internationally for opening up more opportunities to race, whether it's more distances, more races in terms of world champs potentially set to swimmers in the Olympics in 25? What are your thoughts around that?
Sure. I mean, I've been on this FINA coaches committee. I can tell you we don't have a lot of meetings and not a lot happens. There are always recommendations. I think the hardest part with putting together a calendar internationally is that we are at the mercy of an organizing committee wherever that race is going to be held. So for instance, Puerto Rico just got canceled. Like, okay, why are we finding, you know, we need to have one organizing committee within FINA. I believe that actually needs to be a position. And that person is responsible for setting, you know, maybe 9 races throughout the year. Let's do 3 clusters of 3. So maybe 3 in Europe, 3 in Asia, 3 in the Americas. The professionals can hit all 9, the Americans can hit 3, but, you know, trying to find something like that. But I think this just needs to be consistency. There's so much, like we talked about, there's so many things that you don't expect and it shouldn't happen, but we just need to find some consistency in hosting races. And you know, we're jealous that Europeans always get at their European championships. Like you guys have 25K, you have a team event. I mean, we've seen a team event one time every 2 years, you know? And so I think that's really a limiting factor. But I'd love to see more events have that. I think at the World Cups, recently they were adding the team relay with the 10K. We've seen some of those. That's great. I mean, have another event because athletes are already there. You know, they're travel lighting, have them there. Does that make sense?
Question, but specifically at like the Olympic Games, do you think that if they allow more swimmers to be there, do you think that that would actually inspire more swimmers within your country and obviously Great Britain to actually want to do it?
Yeah, it is really difficult when the World Championships is 70 people and the Olympics is 25. It's a completely different race. It really is different. So, I mean, I don't know the reasoning behind having 25. Like they wanted it to be equal representation. Yeah, the way they had it set up was like, hey, 10 qualify at World Championships, 10 qualify at World Championships, 10 qualify in the second race. There has to be a certain, and there's 5 continental qualifiers and no more than 2 per country, which is normal.
I mean, I think they should make the number bigger. I mean,
it doesn't need to be 70. I mean, it should
Yeah.
be smaller than Worlds. Like, it should be an actual, like, not everyone could just go. Like, you still qualify, but it doesn't have to be as small as 25, because that's very limiting to a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, I think 2 per country. That's a, you know, that's similar to pool swimming. You're allowed 2 per event. So, you know, are we mirroring what that and trying to grab traction with that? I think it's going to be interesting. This time they are allowing pool athletes that have the A cut to, you know, enter this race. And, you know, I don't know. I'd love to see. But I can tell you, sometimes I think World Championships is almost more exciting for me as a coach. I mean, your dream ultimately is to win a medal at the Olympic Games. Like, that's insane. And a dream that, you know, so many people have to even qualify for the Olympic Games and then to win a medal there. It's just very different when you show up and there are 25, like you said, athletes, and really it becomes a race of about 10. Like, let's be honest, it's a pack of about 10. So.
Catherine, I have one final question. What are you doing next month with WOWSA? What's this virtual clinic?
I'm not great at promoting myself. No, it's an online clinic. There are 4 Tuesdays, I believe. I'm going to be adding to Steve Newton's content and creating a clinic. So
If you want more Catherine time, you can go
I'm
to
gonna make
the.
Haley do one of them with me. So
Oh,
it's
great.
gonna be a secret, so you don't know which one.
And ASCA attendees get $50 off. You can go to our booth, the WOWSA booth in the app, and redeem that coupon. Catherine, Haley, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry.
It's if you liked being Cozumel because I live there. Yeah. Yeah, I saw the picture and I was.
Actually, the hotel there, Haley won, and they gave us both a certificate to come back and stay for free, but we never made it.
And my second question is for Haley, which are the most important skills that you feel that it's for an open water swim in your own experience? Obviously.
Yeah, like we talked about, like your attitude towards events happening, things happening, getting thrown at you, your attitude and your response to situations. I think that's one of the most important things. And then willingness to really put yourself out there and do the work and do the races. And that openness.
Talking about physically.
Oh, physically.
Orientation,
Yeah, I mean, my training changed a lot over time. It's like, I have a big foundation in distance. My club team is pretty distance heavy. Also, I just have a natural inclination for distance. My mom was a distance swimmer. My sisters swam shorter events, so they're lucky. So I always had that distance background and that foundation in high school to really lead me to open up to different training in college and sort of do shorter things, do longer things, just really play around with it. Because being a distance swimmer, it's tough and it's not always easy.
I also think I'm just going to throw this in there. I think Haley was always really good at finishing well and breathing on her left side. So we would always try to make sure that she was, we'd say if you're coming into the finish line, try to have everybody, do you remember this, like breathe on your left because that's where you're fastest. So she was good at trusting her instincts and navigating the pack. And that's one of the things that I think, again, we don't have a lot of practice doing that in America, so we had to go other places, but she got very good at knowing where she was within the pack and not spending energy.
Great.
Sorry. This was fun. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much, guys.